Louis, good morning and welcome to the fourth video where you're going to educate me about immigration law because I find it fascinating and complicated, and I feel for anybody having to navigate their way through the Home Office rules, which seems to be forever changing, and the terminology changes and it's highly political. Thankfully, we've got you to help people through these challenges. Now, today in Educating Andrew Part 4, we're going to talk about the EU nationals and the EU settlement scheme. I think that's right. Could you explain it in really simple, noddy terms to me and to all those listening what the settlement scheme's all about? And if you use any jargon, I'm going to ask you for an explanation. Okay, deal?
Okay, that sounds good. Sounds good. So yes, the EU settlement scheme. So just in terms of the basics, this is the new mandatory registration system for all EU nationals. So it's mostly for EU nationals, but it could also be for the family members of EU nationals who are not themselves EU nationals. Okay, but they also qualify under this new settlement scheme. So it's been open for a couple of years now. It's tied in with Brexit, obviously. So it's as the free movement of EU nationals, which is the position up until the end of this year, whereby EU nationals can simply come to the UK with a passport or an ID card into the UK, and then they're free to work or not to work as they so wish in the UK. So that is coming to an end, and we've had this settlement scheme.
Which day?
31st of December 2020. So it gets a bit confusing because this people can still come here up until the end of June. I'll come to that maybe in a second. So yeah, we have this system, and it's been going for a couple of years where people can register. But there's been quite a big time window where you're kind of advised to register early, but it's not. People have known, they've always had a bit of leeway about when to get around to it. But the big thing is that, well, number one, in order to be eligible for the scheme, you have to be in the UK by the end of this year, so by the 31st of December 2020. So that's the cutoff point for eligibility. And then we have the separate requirement, which I'll maybe talk about in a bit more detail in a moment, which is that you have to have registered by the end of June 2021. Okay, so you've got kind of two key dates there. Just in terms of what the scheme does, it secures your ability to live in the UK long term. So you'll be given one of two types of status. There's settled status, which means indefinite leave to remain, which is a right to permanently live here. And you'll get that if you've lived here for 5 years. And then there's, if you've been here, or I should say that you just have to have been living here for 5 years. So there's no need to have been working or studying, or you could have been unemployed for 5 years. It's just physical residence. So in that sense, it's slightly more generous than the rights-based system before, which required you to be economically active, to be working and such like. But if you've been here for fewer than 5 years, then it's something called pre-settled status. And so that gives you basically a 5-year visa. And then once you hit the 5-year residence mark, you can then make a second application for settled status, the indefinite leave to remain. So that's how it works, if that makes sense.
Mostly. So good advice then for EU nationals is to come to party in the UK on New Year's Eve and just be here and take some selfies and prove on Facebook, I was here, I was at a party that probably I shouldn't be at during COVID, just to prove that you were here on that date. That's not your advice, right? Or is it?
So yeah, it sounds a bit dubious from a COVID point of view, doesn't it? I don't know if I can be recommending that, but you're not far off, actually. I think they have strict rules. We've just done a blog on this, actually, about the type of evidence that you need. Okay, there's reports that you can get away with an Airbnb booking as evidence of your residence. So you're right that you just need 1 day of residence. Okay, so you can just have come here for a day, but you would need some kind of proof. Boarding cards, I think, are also okay. So if you came by aeroplane, you might have a boarding pass, plane ticket, you can use that. But Airbnb, that has been accepted. So you could do that.
With my, when I take photographs, it will say where I've taken the photograph, which geographical location. Is that of any use to people to prove where they were at a particular time?
Well, it's not in the Home Office. So the Home Office, as you imagine, has lists of what's acceptable and what's not. They just as a related aside, this to register for the scheme, you normally do it through an app on your phone, and they made it so it could only be Android users until quite recently. So that was, I guess half people have Apple phones, don't they? So that knocked out half of the people who could use the service. So not great. So they seem to be a bit anti-iPhone. So I'm not sure about that. But they, generally speaking, they are pretty kind of understanding, or they're not as strict as they are in other areas of immigration when it comes to this registration.
Fair enough. What about EU nationals' ability to use the NHS and claim benefits and etc.? How will that change, if at all?
So that you'll have to be registered under this scheme in order to potentially be able to use the NHS. If you have settled status, so the indefinite leave to remain, then you straightforward definitely can use the NHS. If you have pre-settled status, then you need to be what they call habitually resident, which is, I'm not 100% sure on, it's slightly outside of immigration, but you need to have actually been resident here for a certain period of time and show that you've moved your life to the UK. So it's not, pre-settled status will not automatically qualify you for NHS. That's my understanding.
Okay, so do you foresee a time where the NHS are screening people at their doors saying, actually, no, you can't come in with your broken leg because you haven't got this settled status element sorted out on an app? I mean, is that as draconian as it's going to be, do you think? Or will people get charged, at the NHS, do you think will provide the care and then go, bam, here's the bill to them? How do you foresee it going?
They already do. So hospitals already do screen for immigration status. They check immigration status. They're legally obliged to do that, to check someone's entitlement to use the NHS. So they will be checking. So this is the big. This ties into the big deadline in June. So if you've not registered by the deadline of 30th of June 2021, then you are not living here lawfully, basically. So you're what's called an overstayer. So this will be a new concept, a new idea for EU nationals, because it's not been possible for EU nationals to overstay before, because they've always had a right. So under EU law, it's rights-based. You don't need the government telling you can stay here. You have that right. Unfortunately, that all changes, and so in June you will, if you don't register, you'll become an overstayer. Which is an immigration offence. It also can be a criminal offence as well. And in terms of your NHS treatment, I'm pretty sure hospitals will be wanting to see evidence of pre-settled or settled status. Whether they would do that habitually resident test, I'm not sure they'd be able to do that, but they certainly want to see evidence that you've registered under this settlement scheme.
I've had cause to use NHS multiple times in the last few years. And granted, I'm a white British person, and speak English properly, I hope. No one's ever asked me. But are the NHS, are they looking out for people whose accents are a bit different, look a bit different to me? I mean, it sounds very un-British to sort of do a test of someone's, bona fides, I guess. Is that what has been happening? Have I just avoided it because Andrew Gray sounds British and so on? So that awkward, where are you from question, has been happening in the hospitals and will accelerate as well. Goodness, that seems so awful.
That's an interesting point, because I know in terms of right to work checks, so it's all the same kind of ballpark. But the same area really, which is like the right to work checks, or an employer checking that you have the right to work, or this right to rent. So you can't rent unless you have permission to you're lawfully here, and also the ability to use the NHS. That's kind of falling all under the same area of whether or not you have permission to be here. So I know what the area that I deal with more commonly is the right to work stuff. So helping employers with right to work checks. Now, the kind of innocent kind of slightly naive questions that I might get from an employer. So I'll say, are you doing right to work checks on everyone? Because you have to do it on everyone. And they might kind of say, well, not the people who are British, right? So that's not the correct answer, because you can't be assuming that one person's British and another person isn't British. So you're not meant to be deciding who to do a right to work check on. You're meant to be doing it on everyone and not discriminating based on any other attribute. But to answer your question, I don't think hospitals do routinely ask you, have you been asked for ID?
No.
Or right to work, to write your ability to be here? No, I've not. But there are also many cases in the media, and you're kind of aware of people having very large bills to pay because they didn't have a right to be here. So it's interesting to, wonder about how the hospitals are doing these checks, if they're catching some people but not others.
I suspect their inclination is not to ask. I don't think, because the oaths that the doctors take, not to. It's so against their ingrained instincts to check. Okay, really interesting stuff. Thank you, Louis. Is there any questions I should have asked about this area? There's probably is, because it's hard sometimes to know the right questions to ask.
I think that's covered it. It's just to say, this is a free registration system.
Okay.
I don't want to say it's generous, because that will upset. When it's kind of an insensitive thing to say, given that EU nationals have previously not had to register at all. So I totally get that. But if you were to compare it to any other immigration area, it is generous in the sense that it's free. You just have to register and then live here, and then you'll get indefinite leave to remain, as long as you don't commit a serious crime, you don't go abroad for 5 years in one go. I mean, why would you need to do that? So it's just a case of making sure you're registered on it, making sure it's done as soon as you can, and definitely before the end of June. We have lots of information, lots of blogs on our website if you want more information about that.
One last question, like Columbo. Is the Home Office absolutely overwhelmed with these applications, and therefore are they very slow with dealing with them? Or is it such that it's app-based and there's a lot of artificial intelligence, and it's a computer says yes, computer says no sort of thing? How quick is the process going?
So yeah, that's a good question. They've shown for the first time that they can actually do checks with other government bodies. So they will check residents with HMRC or with benefits agencies to prove you've been living here, which immigration practitioners are up in arms, because we're normally sending the Home Office, massive folders of evidence to show that they've been working or claiming benefits, and we know all along they can just check. Anyway, they do that now. So if your application is, quote, straightforward, you're getting a decision really within a week or so, maybe in a couple of days even. So that's probably like 95% of all applications are being decided very quickly. The only problem is if you have something called a case they consider complex. So if you've not been working, not been claiming benefits, then that takes much longer. And that we had this case, my client who went to The Guardian. So this was a case of a guy who'd been living here for 27 years, but didn't have the right to work at any point, so couldn't work, couldn't claim benefits, so struggled to provide the kind of evidence that they wanted. They couldn't do the checks, and his application had taken, was it a year and a half? So so there's kind of a big difference between whether or not your case is straightforward or complex. And if it's complex, very bad news. You're looking at a year or so for it to be decided.
Wow. Thank you very much, Louis. I've really enjoyed that. And my head's hurting now.
Yes.
I digest it.
Yeah, I'll give you some rest then.
Yeah, and we'll do another Educating Andrew at some point next week.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, Andrew.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.